faintest idea who I really am. I could be multiple people, depending on the time of day. My parents were from Wales. My brother and my sister got on a ship with them in 1956 and went via India to Australia. And I was born 8 years later, so I was the only one of them who was born in Australia. I was fascinated by flying nun bands in the late 1980s. There wasn't a lot of original music being made organically by young people in Sydney. So being that far away from the Northern Hemisphere and starting to hear these bands from New Zealand that were doing their own thing lit something of a fire with me. It ignited a spark with me. And we started out like every other band in Sydney at the time. We were just in sweaty rehearsal rooms. So that's really how them all started out. It was the typical story of just friends all discovering how to make something from nothing. But there were these 4 places you could play, and once you'd done that circuit, you're really at the end of your tour, so to speak, in Sydney. So we spent a couple of years doing that, and we realised, we got some press in England, and we realised the only logical thing to do was to bugger off and go to London via New York. So that's where the moles started to transplant themselves, and my musical pursuits started to transplant themselves out of Australia.
Sounds good.
These 2 things were going on where we were in the music press and getting well received, but at the same time we were living in this Dickensian lifestyle, working in factories at night, and we were in a backpacker's house. It wasn't really a hostel. That experience led to the other moles, the other 3 guys, going back to Australia pretty quickly. But right around the time that happened, I was starting to write some songs that were different in feel than the Moles songs. The Moles were basically a punk band, garage band, and the songs that I started to write in London, right around the time the Moles were breaking up, were, for want of a better word, like late 60s orchestral kind of ballads. And so I had these songs, but I didn't have a band. And my wife, Shirley, said, well, look, you know, we may as well go to Boston because there's lots of musicians there. When we got to Boston, I met this guy, Bob Fay, who had been the drummer, was going to be the drummer in Sebadoh. Meeting Bob led me to a basement in Somerville. I met a guy called Eric Matthews. And so we had this real happenstance where the songs I'd written in London and Eric with his orchestrations and arrangements dovetailed. And so that was what became Cardinal. So we made this record, Cardinal, and that got a lot of attention at the time. This is like 94.
My lovely friends are going to play a tune like this.
So out of that, I was on a tour with the Flaming Lips that kind of came about by word of mouth because of the Cardinal record. And because Cardinal wasn't really a band, as I've been saying, the Flaming Lips said, you know, we'll be a band and play some of these songs. There was a publishing company, Sony Music, that was talking with me about buying the rights to some of my songs. It worked out well, but there was no guarantees that it would. They did sign me. But I got to the point with music, it was so crazy for me. It doesn't come naturally to me. And so I thought, goodness, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And so I thought, hang on a minute, I got this publishing money. I bought a little house in upstate New York and I was never there. I had a wife, I had a dog, but I was never at home. And so I thought, I don't really know if I want to do this for the rest of my life. There's got to be something else to it, which led to the next 30 years with being a lawyer and not really stopping playing music, but becoming this kind of a hybrid. One thing about life that's constant is change. I applied to law school in Chinatown in Boston at New England School of Law, and I got into it, and I actually loved the experience, particularly constitutional law. So it seems like a radical change, but it's not really. It's all just me, just being who I am. Whether it's the music stuff or whether it's cross-examining someone, it's just me living my life. When things are working in a functional way, music is a break from law and law is a break from music. Sometimes they seem like they're at cross purposes, but for the most part, I really find that using my imagination to write songs, to write lyrics and music has a positive effect on my legal imagination, how I cross-examine people, how I craft opening statements, closing arguments. The other thing about it all is I'm a particular kind of lawyer. I'm a trial attorney. Trial attorneys, when they can learn to shut up, not easy to do, what they do is they put on a little play. They tell a story. And that's precisely what I do with the songs that I write. Right now, I've actually got 2 hearing aids in here, and I'd be completely useless without them. I have always been deaf. A lot of people who know me say, well, Richard, it must be because of the loud music, and it's not really. My brother and my sisters were all born with this hearing impairment, and I wasn't really aware of it. So most people, if their hearing's normal, the graph of the frequencies they can hear will look like this. It's a horizontal line, even across the spectrum. Mine goes right down at a 45-degree angle, which means I've got about 50% of a regular person's hearing. I found it to be a difficult challenge, but I found it to be helpful with my music because I hear things in a blurred way. A lot of times I'll misunderstand things people say, and there's been a lot of lyrics I've written because of those mistakes. And the same goes for sounds, chords, notes. I hear them in error, and so it actually becomes quite easy to adapt those sounds and make them my own. Trials tend to be in drafty, high-ceilinged courtrooms, especially in Massachusetts, and they're not conducive to hearing effectively. So if it's bad enough and I can't get away with the hearing aids, I will use the court. It's a set of headphones basically with a little, like a little radio attached to it. And if I don't have it perfectly set, then I can cause feedback to go throughout the whole courtroom and people are confused. So I've got to be careful about it. But honestly, I will sit down and I'll put my hearing aids on, or I'll slap the headphones on in front of the jury. I don't care, really. I'm not a young man anymore. One of the things that's good about getting older is you stop giving a shit about what people think. I was a lawyer and not really a musician at all for about 10 years, but I got writing handwritten letters with Robert Pollard. And out of that correspondence, we ended up making a record together called Cosmos, and that was 2009. And that experience got me back into writing songs regularly and making records. So it was just a natural outgrowth of that I started putting out Moles records again. Most of those records originate right here, and a lot of them get made right here. That said, the way it's come about now is I tend to have friends all over the place. I've got friends in a bunch of cities in the US where there's little cells of musicians who become moles. Going back to that graph idea, When I was in the malls in the late 80s in Sydney, I really felt like this was the trajectory of life. Starts here and goes that way. And it doesn't. Life goes like this for everybody. So that's the answer to that question.